Hi, welcome to the fourth video and week of our program on developing a publications program. Over the first 3 weeks we've looked at very general things, and now we're going to start to focus a little more closely, but still not specifically about the article you're hoping to write through this program. Again, this is something I hope you'll have time to look at on your own and work through the details and activities in the workbook, but also to do in your study group, and as we move through, to share with your writing group. So this week the focus is on where to publish. Last week we looked at what to publish. Now we're looking at where you might publish it. So the outline for this session is, first of all, where does your work sit? What fields do you work in? The second thing is, who is your audience? And I've listed 3 different audiences there that we will address: academic journals, professional journals, and conference papers. And the third thing, although for many of you this might be a bit early, sometimes you want to look at when should I write a book? And we'll deal with that briefly. Okay, so where does your work sit? What I always ask when I'm doing a research project is, who would be interested in what we're finding out? This doesn't just include those who might be involved as practitioners, but who in the research field would be interested in what we're finding? Now, to find out some of these things, look at your references as a good place to start. So for example, if you've done a PhD or a master's, where's the first place to look at where you might put your work? Look at the references. What journals have you been referencing? And in that space, you should see there's some that clearly come through. This will help you to identify the key journals in your field. So for example, in mathematics education, which is my area, I could tell you the top 5 or 6 journals in mathematics. There's the Journal for Research in Mathematics Education. There's the Journal of Mathematical Behaviour. There's ZDM. There's the Mathematics Education Research Journal. There's the Journal of Mathematics Teacher Development. There's the Journal of Mathematics and Science Education. So there, off the top of my head, are 5 of the top ranked journals. Now I know that these are all in mathematics education, and I know because I've published in them, I've cited them, and I've read them. So if you want to know where does your work sit, well, look at the journals you're reading. And if you've done a significant research project, you must have read a number of journals to get your literature background and to frame up your project. The other thing I'd look at is, how are they ranked? Now, rankings can be a bit meaningless, and I wouldn't necessarily get too caught up on them, but you'll see that there's some that are more highly regarded than others. Now, they're helpful, but don't get too consumed with them. Often the highest ranked journal have a very high rejection rate, and they publish very specific large-scale studies. So in mathematics education, JRME, the Journal for Research in Mathematics Education, is published by the National Councils of Teachers of Mathematics in America, and it's a very hard journal to get into. They publish really only large-scale quantitative studies, but it's important to know what they are and what sort of thing they do. So the short answer here is, look at the journals that you read and cite, and that'll give you a really good idea about where you might want to publish your findings. Second thing is, who is your audience? As we mentioned last week, often the same piece can be recrafted for multiple audiences. So those in your discipline field, e.g. mathematics, those in your educational field. So there'll be journals of mathematics education. There'll also be journals about educational assessment. Often you can write the same journal article slightly differently and have it published in 2 different places. So don't just limit yourself to your discipline field, which, particularly given you're a department of maths, science and technology education, don't just limit yourself to your discipline. Also think about your educational fields. Also thinking about who you write for, researchers and academics. So that's research journals really. they have a specific audience and they need to be written in certain ways. They want to see things like detailed descriptions of the methodology and a detailed theoretical framework. But also you should write them for other audiences like professionals and policymakers. So for example, if you're doing a project on assessment in chemistry education, you definitely need to write that for an academic and research audiences, but you also need to write it for professional audiences. What do teachers need to know about this? What do chemistry teachers need to know? What do policymakers about assessment in schools need to know? What do government policymakers need to know about assessment practices? Now, often when you write them for these people, the journals are much shorter in what they want. They don't want 6,000 or 8,000 words. They might want 2,000 or maybe 3,000 words. They don't want 2 pages of references. They often only want a few. And they don't really want a strong theoretical framework. Often they just want to know what you found out. So who's your audience is important to know about where you're going to publish it. Now again, if I did a study on assessment in maths education, a research project, I would try and publish it in at least one mathematics education research journal, at least one assessment research journal, and then at least one mathematics professional journal for teachers, and possibly one assessment journal for teachers as well, or policymakers. So this is just summarising some of those things we talked about before. When you're going to publish it for researchers and academics, it'll be in peer-reviewed academic journals. If it's not peer-reviewed, don't bother putting it in because it's not really worth it. You'll also publish it in research conference presentations and hopefully research proceedings as well. Now, one of the things I had there before I accidentally pressed the button is be really careful about predatory publishers. There are publishers out there who will publish your things and they'll just want you to pay for it. Now, it's not always the case. Some of the reputable publishers like Springer and Routledge and Sage do have pay for publication, and that gives you open access. Personally, I don't use them, but it is, if you can get funds in a research grant to do that, that's a useful way of getting your work read by others. But you'll likely keep getting emails from different publishers who want you to publish your work. They'll turn it around very quickly with very shaky and shifty review processes, and they'll charge you to do it. These are called predatory publishers, and don't publish your work there. It's not worth it. No one reads it, and it's about making money for the publishers. It's not about disseminating your work to people who really need to read it. The second group of people we talked about before were professionals and policymakers. So try and write your research in a professional teacher journal. Try and present your findings at teacher conferences. And try and run professional development sessions for teachers in schools if that's where it's focused. So for example, if you did something on technology education for primary school children, then maybe there's a journal in Indonesia, a teacher journal, that would be able to publish a short article with some practical ideas for teachers. I know you have the research conference in August in Malang, but maybe you also have other conferences for teachers where they come and learn about education, and you might present a practical workshop there. And you also might, and this happens at least in Australia, I often get invited to schools to run professional development sessions for teachers about topics. So your research might be relevant, and a school might say, can you come and run an hour-and-a-half workshop with our teachers about using technology in the primary school? And that's a really useful and important thing to do. In fact, it's part of our moral obligation as researchers in education. So this is really just pulling together some of these ideas I've threaded through for the last few weeks. You should try and get value from a paper. In other words, try and get 3 or 4 outputs every time you write something. So, sorry, I've accidentally pressed the button again. I'll just try and go back. So for example, if you write a conference presentation or paper, so maybe you're writing one for the COSME conference in August, a really good idea. Once you've presented that at the conference, you'll get some feedback and you might publish it in the proceedings, but it's only a short paper. The next thing to do is, if your research is substantial enough, Try and then develop that into a much bigger paper with a much stronger theoretical framework and a more detailed analysis of the methodology and a more robust discussion of the findings, and send it into a peer-reviewed journal. And that can be related to your discipline field, i.e. mathematics or physics or chemistry or something like that. Then try and write the same journal article. You have to rewrite it, don't just send the same thing, but rework the same idea, drawing on similar but other literature in the field to send it to your educational journal in that field. So it might be the Journal of Assessment and Education or something like that. And then fourthly, try and write a professional article for teachers as well. And again, I'm not familiar with Indonesia, whether you have many of these, but certainly in Australia, there's a lot of professional articles for teachers. So you might be able to do 1, 2, and 4 here, or you might do 1, 3, and 4. But see if you can get more than one output for the same piece of work. And a good place to start might be the paper you're doing at a COSME this year. Here's an example. If you did a study into chemistry multi-choice assessment, the first thing you could do is present your paper at the conference in August this year. Then the second thing you should do is, you've already done all that thinking and work around it, develop it up for a chemistry education journal. And then develop another one up for an educational assessment journal. All right, now in the educational assessment journal, they don't really care that much about chemistry, but they just want to know that that's the context it took place in. So in your literature review that frames the study, you'd talk less about chemistry and more about assessment. Whereas in the first journal article, you'd talk much more about chemistry because you're sending it to people who are interested in chemistry-specific education. And then see if you can write an article for the Science Teachers Association journal as well. Just an example, each time's different, but there is scope to really get good value for the academic and research work you do in preparing a journal article. Just a couple of things about a book. A lot of you won't be ready to write a book yet, but an edited book is often a good way to go when you have a coherent body of work with colleagues. So if there's a group of you that have all been working on something together and you've all done a lot of small projects on the same or related topics, then maybe you could pull it together to write an edited book where everyone writes a chapter. And the editors would write an introductory and a concluding chapter as well. I can talk to you more about that, but you'd need to have a bit of experience before you go into this. It's often a way to get the output from a focus symposia or something together. So let's say you had a symposia on STEM education in an Indonesian primary schools, and you had 10 small studies you'd done on that topic. And people might come together and talk about their ideas and present them and discuss them. And then from that symposium, you could prepare an edited book, which would be able to share those ideas more widely. You need to remember that once you do a book, you've got to have something you can share with an international audience. Because it's one thing to write a book, but you need someone to publish it, and you need someone reputable to publish it. And the thing to consider is when they want to publish something, in essence, what they want is books that they can sell. Now, having said that, Indonesia is a very big country with a large population, so that may be a way of selling it, because you can sell it to an Indonesian audience, which would guarantee a large number of books. But good publishers' books are expensive as well, so just an idea to consider, but at this stage, don't have it at the forefront of your mind. Also, you might want to write a whole book. I've written 7, and I don't recommend it as an easy thing to do, but you've got to do it when you've got plenty of time, because it takes a lot of time. You need to have a strong and coherent collection of work on a single topic. And you need to have something that you can share with an international audience. Because again, as the notes say below, publishers will want something that will sell. And publishers aren't really interested in disseminating research, they're interested in selling books or book chapters. And incidentally, most of their sales these days are e-books and e-chapters. The point at the bottom is just, again, be aware of the predatory publishers. They'll often, when you write an article or something, you'll get an email from some random person saying they want to publish your book or something like that. But often they're really not worth it. So stick with those who are reputable. If you're not sure, a good place to ask is your librarians at your university, or again, if you're not sure, ask me and I can help you. So there's some ideas about what to write. And again, there's our contact details if needed. So all the best as you work through the material this week. I'm hoping you're finding the program helpful. Persevere if there's some things that are a little bit tricky or hard for you. In the end, we're looking to develop coherent long-term research and publication programs that will sustain you for many years.